He's dreaming about video games.
Crush blacks. Chromatic aberration. Screen tearing. 30 frames per second!
No, it's okay. It's okay, Stu. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as 30 frames per second. It was just a nightmare. It was just a nightmare, baby. It's okay.
What is your name? Prince of the darkness, say what is your face? Man of the night is white. The look into your eyes, king of the terror. Why you're searching in my mind? Only my warrior.
I didn't really get Bayonetta for a long time. I'm not sure I even do now, but by God, you can't say I haven't tried. First version I nabbed was the PS3 version, which runs like crap. Then later I nabbed it on 360, which runs smoother, but frankly I don't use my 360 all that much, so it fell by the wayside. Then finally, recently, I picked it up along with its sequel for the Wii U, determined to finally enjoy the game and understand its appeal, and I think I do, but not entirely. There's no denying it's a fun game to play, and the cutscenes, which I was a little bit reactionary about, because, for God's sake, video games, will you just stop, grew on me as the character of Bayonetta grew on me. I was told over and over again that it's not exploitation, and I'm still not convinced it isn't, but she is a more interesting character than the usual here are my tits offerings we get in this stupid hobby. Cocky and confident in a way that somehow doesn't feel like the contrived sex fantasy it almost certainly is. As for the actual game, yeah, it's fun to play. It's full of mechanics I don't understand and don't use, like something called dodge offset, which means you can continue a combo after a dodge, but I don't know how it works, so whatever, I just mash the button that makes you twat things. It's fun, and there's probably an intriguingly complex combat system going on if you like that sort of thing. I don't, really. I'm more interested in traversal when it comes to 3D games. God, that sounds old-fashioned, doesn't it now? 3D games that take place in 3D space, like Jumping Flash or Uncharted 4. So I suppose I'm just not into this sort of action game where there isn't much in the way of traversal involved, just escalating combat challenges. See, when I played DMC Devil May Cry, the best game in the series, it balanced really fun combat with platforming and exploration that Bayonetta so far just doesn't seem to have. Also, Bayonetta has killed me with unexpected cutscene QTEs twice now, and that does my head in. Anyway, in closing, I still don't really get it, but I bought it 3 times, so you know what, give me a break, alright? Every so often there's a game comes along that you just know you're going to like, regardless of its critical reception. Agents of Mayhem is one of mine. I knew from the announcement CGI trailer that I was going to love it. The Saturday morning cartoon personality on display mixed with the edgier Saints Row style was always going to be a winner for me, but I wasn't prepared for just how much I'd fall in love with the consistently high quality of the interaction happening among the game's characters. I wouldn't go so far as to call the cast of Agents of Mayhem deep, but they've put thought into each of the 14 titular agents' respective backstories in a way that makes them feel distinct just to spend time with, the way they interact with one another, the way that the dialogue is tailored for whichever agent you're currently playing as. It's so thorough and so convincing, and you really get a sense of this group dynamic you're participating in. Everyone knows everyone else, and it's not just the agents but the enemies too. Troops will call out the agent you're currently controlling, and it all comes together to give the game an enormous sense of personality. Another thing I have to mention is the sheer diversity of the cast. Of the 14 agents, 7 are women, and only 4 are white Americans. While this obviously doesn't have any impact on gameplay, it's utterly refreshing to hear this plethora of different races, colours and backgrounds interact with each other free of cliché, free of tokenism, and utterly free of sameness. Bored with Hollywood's gleaming white teeth? Swap them out for the Italian model assassin, the masked Yakuza, African-American ex-Marine, or the German football hooligan. They all play differently, and most crucially, they all feel like distinct, memorable characters. I found myself wanting to replay missions just to see what another character would make of the events they're in, and how they put a voice to said thoughts. You'll notice I haven't talked much about the gameplay, and that's because it's pretty bog standard stuff in a lot of ways. It's largely entirely competent with a broad selection of mission types that sadly often end up the same way: run through underground base, kill everyone, hack everything, move on. The game is definitely fun, and it's got some neat set pieces and high points, but by and large, it's quite familiar stuff. It's interesting because the diverse nature of the cast doesn't extend to the gameplay at all, so it can occasionally be a little bit jarring. There's all this fun stuff in the periphery, but the moment-to-moment gameplay just doesn't quite reach that standard. It's fun, and I keep playing it, and that's all that matters, really. You constantly unlock new gadgets and skill points to improve your agents and modify their tactics. Even the most useless agent will probably quickly accrue new abilities that make them very much a viable part of any squad you'll care to put together. But ultimately you'll get a team of old reliables and stick with them for a lot of the missions, and maybe subbing the others in sort of situationally. One interesting decision is the lack of any sort of box-ticking open-world nonsense. There are events in the game world that you can partake in like any given Saints Row, but they're impermanent. For example, there are enemy towers you can seize control of to increase your hourly income, but even if you capture all 4 of them, they'll ultimately be retaken by the enemy again. Everything is repeatable, and there's no acknowledgement like, hey, this is done, tick the box, 100%. I actually find it kind of an interesting breath of fresh air, but I can see why some gamers might get, a little bit OCD about it. Agents of Mayhem has sold like shit, which is a damn shame, even though I kind of get it. I naturally assumed it was a co-op game until very close to release. It isn't. There is no co-op whatsoever, which is baffling because it would have added so much to the game. It's also not a hero shooter, which the marketing for the game really made it look like. It's a straight-up single-player open-world shooter, and it's a very fun one, with a lot of personality, and it's that personality and that breadth of character and show of utterly sincere diversity with good character work, great interaction, and a real sense of these characters having a history together that makes me feel so bummed out that Volition haven't been rewarded for what their game is, rather punished for what it isn't. So, Agents of Mayhem gets an official Stuart Gipp in Video World endorsement. If you want to see a shooter with a big character to it, with a well-realised comical world with terrific voice acting and silly humour and a feeling of real love put into it, then buy Agents of Mayhem. It's very, very impressive.
Maybe they didn't see me. Here's a little something for you. Got something for you.
I used to have this shareware CD called Jump and Run Games, actually I still have it, and it had this game called Lost City of Atlantis on it. Unremarkable little platformer except for one thing: your bloke was stark bollock naked. No shame at all, just flapping out all over the place, nude as the day he was born. I used to try and pause the game as he was turning around so I could see his knob. What? What's wrong with that? It was a remarkable sight. How many knobs do you really see in video games? The answer is very few indeed, and I would, for one, argue not nearly enough. Anyway, that's the only reason I'm bringing this game up at all. You can see his knob. This computer man's flaccid knob. Look at it. Look at his knob.
Metal Slug!
Like many others, I'm a pretty big fan of the Metal Slug series. I mean, I made a half-hour franchise and lows about it. Visually spectacular classic 2D blasting, what's not to like? So I threw on one of the games the other night and had a sort of horrific epiphany that it might actually suck. Don't get me wrong, I still like the games, and I can't imagine a time when I'm playing video games and not having the odd bash on Metal Slug, but I've come to feel that the gameplay experience it offers is somewhat lacking compared to its contemporaries. Control is stiff and firing is mostly limited to 2 directions, when 8-way fire wouldn't have significantly affected the design and would have rendered the game more playable. There's no auto-fire in the originals, requiring the player to mash the button for every exhausting bullet. It can often feel as though you're expending more effort wrestling with the controls than dodging fire. The boss battles are long and arduous at times, and bullets barely seem to be doing any damage long before extremely serious carpal tunnel sets in and you actually fucking die. I mean, I got to thinking about aesthetics again, got to thinking just how much more important graphics ultimately are than gameplay, which is true, don't argue, and I started wondering exactly how much shit I've put up with from the Metal Slug series simply because it's beautiful. A more sexist YouTuber would start making some sort of comparison to dealing with horrible behaviour from a beautiful woman, but I'm not like those people who don't even throw up in their mouth when they refer to themselves as YouTubers. I think women are good and never say bad things about them or harass them or dox them, unless they were in any way critical of my behaviour or interest in even the most benign way. So maybe I'm reiterating an earlier point because I'm completely out of material, but with a series like Metal Slug, while I definitely enjoy the games, I think it's in spite of their flaws. I think the incredible creativity and aesthetics win out over what is quite a sluggish run and gun. Yeah, I said sluggish. No, I didn't mean it like a pun, Metal Slug, sluggish, it just happened. Maybe they named it Metal Slug in the first place because it's meant to be sluggish. Like some sort of ironically bad art game that is actually bad and that's the twist. Ultimately, I think I'll forgive a game a lot of missteps if it can keep impressing me with good-looking stuff. And it's not like the series is a big pile of shit like Pokemon or something. It's just a bunch of games with big, obvious flaws that are considered classics because of the way they look. Bit bloody racist if you ask me. Pertinent. Oh, hi.
He's gonna play the video games. He doesn't like the video games. He's a furious video games man.
Faraday cage. Hi. Have you noticed all this censorship lately? What's going on with that? The evil within is absolutely stark raving mental in every conceivable way. It's a hodgepodge mishmash of disparate mechanics which quite frankly doesn't work, full of design decisions that make absolutely no logical sense, and yet somehow it's one of the best games of the generation. You play as who the hell cares, it doesn't matter, going through a series of shoebox dioramas based on the theme of dinge fuck. You can sprint for about 1 second before becoming entirely exhausted. You constantly have maybe 2 bullets to your name, and patrolling enemies you attempt to sneak up on or stealth kill can turn around at any time for no discernible reason. It shouldn't be good, but it is. It's mechanically utterly baffling, but for me that just added to the challenge. You've got to be ready to adapt, you can't really make any plans and execute them because something will always go to shit. The odds are stacked against you and that's what makes it feel so damn good when you succeed. The environments are shifting and changing so drastically that it feels schizophrenic and disjointed, but that's exactly what they're going for, so it works. It's disorienting, confusing, and genuinely gorgeous at times. The monsters are memorable and frightening, and you always feel intimidated by the enemies. Later in the game it becomes a little bit more like a shooter, but ammo is never plentiful. You're always scrabbling for resources, though with upgrades you can sprint for 3 full seconds before collapsing on the floor and getting your glands chewed off, which is a nice reprieve. The game suffers from performance issues on consoles, though I believe they've patched the lion's share of it up now. They added the option to switch off the game's large black borders, which I opted not to do as they are very obviously a stylistic decision that make the game much more tense. You can't see the bottom of ladders, and floor-bound ammo and items require you to actually, look at the ground to find them. It adds immersion. Others will disagree. They can all fuck off. The Evil Within, it's great. Buy it. There's a sequel out too. Buy that also, unless it's bad. But it probably isn't. I guess I'll find out when they deliver it to me on Monday. Major Havoc is an interesting example of a multi-genre gameplay experience from Atari back when they were industry titans. It's ace. First you do a bit of third-person Phoenix-esque shooting, then there's a real brief segment where you need to land on an enemy base in the manner of something like Lunar Lander, then you infiltrate the base and float around before an escape sequence followed by a spectacular explosion and subsequent mission briefing during which you can play a tiny game of Breakout for some reason. Then it starts again, but harder, as arcade games of the era are wont to do. It's absolutely great, and a big part of that is the smooth, luminescent wireframe graphics that emulation simply cannot do justice to. The fantastic Atari Vault compilation available on Steam has an option that sort of replicates the brilliant brightness of the original arcade cabinet, but in truth there is no comparison, it's just the best way to experience an unjustly forgotten game. Really, really good stuff that I have all the time in the world for. There are few sounds in video games more panic-inducing than the scream of a headless suicide bomber, except maybe the screams of 50 headless suicide bombers, or the Sonic drowning music, get it off now! Anyway, Serious Sam is a series that is resolutely unserious. In fact, it's very silly indeed, and from thence the humour arise. Basically, you have to go into large areas full of enemies and then walk backwards while firing until they're all dead. Okay, that's a reductive view, but it's really not that far off because tactics barely change for the too few enemy types you encounter. Most of them just run straight at you, and those that don't just hang back and fire like, yeah, he'll be here in a minute. There's only minor variation throughout, but it gets so hectic at times that you can't help but get caught up in the chaos. The primary appeal for me is the proliferation of ridiculous hidden secrets, including full secret levels and rewards for doing things that are stupid, which regular viewers will know is one of my favourite things a video game can do. I didn't bother explaining which Serious Sam game I'm talking about here because they're all basically the same thing and of the exact same quality throughout. You can play them all split screen or online with Steam's Serious Sam Fusion application, which basically multiplies the fun by how many people are playing. And you can often get the entire series for shit all £90 nothing, so get it in and see how you feel. It's seriously okay, I guess. I can't remember the last time I touched the ZL or ZR buttons on my new Nintendo 3DS, or the little nipple thing for that matter. In fact, I'd say I've copped more real actual nipple than I have that little computer nipple, and I play my 3DS literally all the time. I've actually had the 3DS in one hand and a nipple in the other before, but I never touched that little analog nip. I've been a Sonic fan since I was 4. It was the very first game I ever played, Sonic on the Master System. I'm not going to get bogged down in fandom shit, that's the opposite of Video World, but I have to address this because I'm talking about Sonic Mania, which is fandom encapsulated, crystallized into an entity. I'll joke about Sonic all the time, I'll joke about Sonic fans all the time, but I am not ashamed of being a Sonic fan, not ashamed of immersing myself in that community of playing and replaying all of those excellent games. The best Sonic games are, to my mind, precursors to the modern sandbox, make your own fun, play for the sheer joy of playing. Those games are about creative traversal, so its fans are, well, creative. Passionate and clever and creative people who create and create and create. They can't stop creating. It spills out of them like so many dropped gold rings. Create and create more and more. Art, comics, writing, animation, criticism, game modifications, full new games, and Sega encourage this. They don't stifle it at all, and why would they? Why should they? And why should people be ashamed of liking something? What's to be gained from sneering at them? Now, having said all of that, Sonic Mania. Sonic Mania has, I'd imagine, been broadly described as a celebration of the series. I suppose I can see why. I'd personally describe it as a wallow. Despite being a Sonic game, it feels paced like treacle, thanks largely to the gimmicky and routinely unenjoyable boss fights. To my mind, Sonic bosses are supposed to be rewards for traversing the stage beforehand. Relatively simple to take apart, fun to ping off of, loud and brash and knockabout. These resolutely aren't. They're complex, difficult to pass visually, and sort of the opposite of what I want from a game like this. I don't really want to think about these fights. Challenging is fine, but I don't want to have to try and figure out how to even hit them. I don't want these manic, visually far too busy messes taking up my time. Boss battles aside, the whole game is made up of odd decisions that mark it out very specifically as the fan game it ultimately is. And I don't mean fan game as a dirty word, but it's a patchwork of the way we wish these games had been, a Frankenstein of ideas that seem cool in theory, but are imprecise and muddled in practice. Like, what if Flying Battery was even longer? What if Hydro City was completely unmemorable? What if Oil Ocean had less visibility? Ultimately, the remix zones are, to my mind, not at all successful in offering an experience that does anything more than make me wish I was playing the original, much more gracefully designed games from their respective origins. The new games are a similarly mixed bag. The early Studiopolis is the showpiece as far as I'm concerned, an excellent halfway house between Sonic CD's wide-open design and the laser-focused open linear style of the original Sonic the Hedgehog. It's a genuinely great level, soiled with a little too much fan-wank, with its numerous, glaring bits of obscura, references to franchise minutiae like Sonic Popcorn Factory, which serve mostly to distract and annoy. It's a little bit like watching something with someone who's overly familiar with it, constantly pausing to go, hey, did you get it? Did you see what we did? Other new zones are also underwhelming. Press Garden is a confused aesthetic in search of a gameplay flow, a really muddled experience. Mirage Saloon is an interesting concept that wastes its entire first level on a remake of Sonic 2's always awful Sky Chase Zone, then segues into an extended homage to a deleted level from the same game, ending on a triple fanservice boss battle with unmemorable non-entities Bark, Bean and Knack, from an obscure arcade game and the weakest of the Game Gear platformers respectively. The final stage, Titanic Monarch, is an entirely linear platformer that, while fun, doesn't really feel even slightly like a Sonic stage with its near total dearth of alternate routes. If there are any other original stages, they made so little impact on me that I truly don't remember them. Look, the classic Sonic games are triumphs of minimalism. I know that might sound mental, but hear me out. Everything else, the aesthetic, everything on top of these games is window dressing. It is wonderful, marvellous window dressing for these simple D-pad and one-button games. Every negative element of the classic Sonics is born of the developers betraying that simplicity. The barrel in Carnival Night, the myriad gimmicks in Metropolis, the ridiculous seesaw bullshit in Starlight, it all betrays that core dynamic of exploiting momentum using the environment and your own abilities, experimenting, finding what works and executing it. That's Sonic, that's the entire game. And now we've got Sonic Mania where you're running away from the Death Egg robot in level 1 because that would be cool. Where you play Mean Bean Machine because that existed, throw it in. It's just that kind of thing, and it's exhausting. The flow is absent, the simplicity is compromised, it's botched, it's a botch. And yet, you know, it's still pretty fucking great. It's still a 2D Sonic game where you whirl around the screen, exploring, finding new things, collecting rings, and generally having a blast. There are moments of pure, joyous creativity. There are some great spins on the old stages. The special stages are a blast and among the best the series has to offer. The game is easily worth the asking price, and a Sonic fan like me is going to dig the heck out of it and play it multiple times. You know, for all my criticisms, it's probably the best Sonic game since 1995. But I'm not going to lie to myself and say it's the equal of those Mega Drive games, and I don't think I can put that down to nostalgia. I think it's a flawed simulacrum that ultimately stems from a false memory, a delusion that these games were a certain way, had a certain feel and a complexity, and a constant stream of new ideas that they absolutely didn't, that Sonic Mania tries to capture, but it can't because it never existed. Sonic works when it is just you out there in the world making your own fun. Mania doesn't work because it thinks it knows better. Well, that was the Halloween special. What did you think?
What was that to do with Halloween?
We covered some horror games, and you know the title card was from The Shining.
You literally had like decades worth of horror games that you could have covered there.
Well, I only got so much time.
Yeah, well, brevity is the soul of wisdom.
I don't have to put up with this abuse.
Alright. But do you know what? Walking away isn't going to make you show any better.
Fuck off.
You know what? Swearing's not big and it's not clever. Right, now that cunt's gone, time to crack on with my own show called Ken in Video World. Wait, do you know what? Hang on. It's got nothing to do with VHS, does it? Right, okay, what about Ken in Gamesland? Okay, no, hang on. That's enough of that. Get some Starship on. Right, okay, today's featured game is WWF WrestleMania Challenge on the NES. You can play as yourself!